That's right. All right, let's go ahead and get started with prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for your love and your mercy and your grace and the opportunity, Lord, to study your word and to be in a place that desires to know more about you. Lord, I ask that you would truly help me to not only remember the things that I've studied, but to be able to explain them in a way that is understandable and helps people grow in their spiritual walk with you, to understand why you're worthy of dedicating everything to Jesus. Holy Spirit, illuminate us, keep me free from error and heresy, and let this be a time of enjoyment and effort on our part, paying back to you, Lord, by giving our all to the study of your word. For your name we pray, Jesus, help us now. Amen. Okay, we'll start things out here with this handy-dandy map. And on this handy-dandy map, what you need to remember is travel narratives were really big back in first century times. Okay, travel narratives, what they would do is it would help you visualize places you would know to bring up the reality of the situation. And for them, they knew all these places. And just because Steve can't pronounce Tyre, that's okay. They would have been able to. Don't worry. Miletus, I killed it at least 17 times, and that was the main city, so I'm not going to say anything about that. But when we come through here, remember, we're going to cross a bunch of islands in the Aegean Sea. Who remembers any of these islands? Anybody? Throw something out there at me. What'd you say? No. Cyprus. You go past Cyprus, and it's out there. But there were three main ones. Remember? Kos. Very good. And then there was what else? Well, it's in there, but it was a little earlier. You want to go a little further south. You want to go Kos, Rhodes, and Patara, or Petra, or however you're actually supposed to pronounce it. Don't worry, Steve. There's me doing it right there. Patara, as I always say, but I heard Tina pronounce it differently today. Remember, these places are rich with history. You know, Rhodes being one that had the great big statue that was one of the 7 ancient wonders of the world. And you got a place involved in here that also was a medical center established by our good friend too. By now you should know this guy's name. Well, we will say Luke, that's fine, but a medical center, think of the Greek father of medicine. Look at it like that. Who Very good, Hippocrates. Very good, Hippocrates. Very good. We've come up with him. We've seen Tyre. When we get down into Tyre, it's a big place in the Old Testament. We saw it earlier with Herod and the situations with him. Phoenicia is a big place in the Old Testament. You need to know all this. These are all places rich with history. Caesarea Maritima was a huge place. Remember, Herod built it up. It was one of the capital areas of that time that the Romans had a big seat in to run the Middle East, basically. And then we've moved our way down into the big city. We've been working towards Jerusalem. Now remember, going into Jerusalem, there was always these prophets trying to say things. What were they saying? And who were they? Tell me some of the prophets. My nose wants to start running all of a sudden, but you guys tell me the prophets. I might have to catch my nose here. Let's see here. What happened? We've run into a few groups here. We've run into, remember, at Tyre, we ran into a group that said, the Holy Spirit said, don't go. And Paul's like, I'm going anyway. Thanks for being concerned. And then we ran into, who was the, remember, what now? Agabus, your main prophet, your older prophet. We also ran into, remember Philip the evangelist, who was really big. Do not confuse Philip the evangelist with Philip the apostle. Some people do, and even some people who have good degrees, which that can't be the case. They cannot be the same, because this Philip was one of the 7, and the whole point was let the apostles do the things. But remember Philip the evangelist, he had some kids. What were they, and who were they?
4
Very good. And they're of marriageable age, which means what? Which means what? Either they've dedicated their whole life to serving the Lord, or what else can it mean? Steve, you got it. They were just, yes, thank you. Somebody here remembered and paid attention. Yes. I was the only theologian to never say that, by the way, but we'll be all right. That's okay. It was either they dedicated their life to the Lord, or they were just too ugly to get married. Or the two. We weren't quite sure, but they were unmarried. They inevitably moved to Asia, and they play a part in church history. The fact is, they're of marriageable age, which some believe makes them in their earlier teens. We don't know. But Peter does use this as an example of God using teenagers and how you're never too young to work for Christ. And I like that idea. I guarantee you they were somewhere at least in their teens to late teens, because you got married between 12 to 18 at that time, usually 12 to 15. And so for him to mention this, it means at the very least they're in their teens, okay? And everybody's prophesying, and Agabus, what does he do? What does he do? He goes to a prophetic sign act, and what does he do in this prophetic sign act?
He bound his hands and feet with belt.
Remember his own hands, his own feet. And then he ties with the teeth. And what he says here is what? Whoever owns this belt, this shall what? Happen to him. And what is he saying is going to happen? What is he predicting to happen to Paul? Well, he's predicting, that certainly could be implied. That's certain. I don't mind that answer at all. He's most certainly predicting the arrest of Paul. And what he's saying is the Jews are going to hand Paul over to the Romans. How does it play out? We'll get to it later, but I mentioned to you it's the thrust that matters, not the details. And what actually happens is Paul goes into the temple, gets accused of bringing a Gentile into the temple. We'll get to this probably next week. And then it starts a riot with the Jews who beat the living snot out of him, literally want to beat him to death. Their goal is to beat him to death. And then instead of beating him to death, the Romans, because they don't like public chaos, get involved and take Paul into custody. So technically, the Jews are responsible for Paul being arrested. And that's what the thrust of the prophecy is. Okay? Makes sense? It makes sense? So although the Jews don't go, here's Paul, arrest him, they are the one who is responsible for it happening. All right, this leads us right now to our time in Jerusalem. He goes anyway. He stops off at Mnasson's. Remember, Mnason was he himself was an older disciple, which means he possibly could have followed Christ around, or he had been around early in Acts. He could have been part of the 120. But many people believe that Mnason became a source for Luke to get information about what? What was going on in the early church, possibly for his own gospel, possibly for Acts. But they believe Mnason, to write his book. One way or another, he became a good source of information. Well, this is going to be the last friendly thing we really see. Well, technically, when we first get into Jerusalem, it's friendly. And then after that, it is not so friendly. What is the cultural, societal atmosphere in Jerusalem? Because we're in Jerusalem right now in 57 AD for you guys who like to say it the wrong way. We're in Jerusalem, May 29th, May at least, 57 AD. What is the atmosphere like in Jerusalem at this time?
High tension.
Very high tension. What's going on?
How many years after this now was it when Paul showed his face back? This is, when he left, how many years was it till he come back here?
This is what happens after this. Remember, he gets sent off to trial. And what he does after this, it can be a matter of debate. Okay? This is going to be, some people think this is his fifth visit here, up to his fifth visit now. What happens after this, I don't really think he comes back personally. But we'll get into that, okay? We'll see what happens. Because there's some debates on how this works out. What's inevitably going to happen here with this time, though, it's going to be playing on the situation that surrounds the culture with what happens to Paul. Because we have a very, very tense situation to where we're 9 years away from AD 66 or 66 AD. What happens in AD 66? That's on the tip of your tongue. Remember, what year is the temple destroyed? 70 AD. AD 66 starts the Jewish revolt against the Romans. Yes. And so what happens here is, these are events that are beginning to unfold that is setting the atmosphere for all that to happen. What you have right now is this intense hatred for the Romans. There's this leader named Felix right now. He's really bad to the Jews. The Romans are doing things like Roman soldiers found a Torah scroll and ripped it in half and burned it. And they're mistreating the Jews everywhere. So you're having this rise in Jewish nationalism and political unrest right now in Jerusalem. But this whole anti-Roman hatred, anti-Gentile sentiment, this whole notion of we don't trust outsiders. If you're not a Jew, we don't trust you, which means Paul's mission to the Gentiles is being viewed with suspicion. When they go, he goes to the Gentiles, they don't see it that way. They see it almost as we don't need the Gentiles included in this because we've got a lot going on right now, and the only thing we can do is get back to our heritage, get back to our roots, and take it for each other, because if we don't have our back, who does? And so this is what they're saying right now. And you've got at the height right now of messianic expectations. There's one good thing about that. Messianic expectations are going to lead people to have faith in Jesus. Okay? But there's going to be some mix in this as well. Because along with these messianic expectations is a call to get back to your Jewish roots and your Jewish heritage, which is going to lead into two major things. One is going to be a terrorist group named Sicarii. Anybody know about them? What the Sicarii would do is they would go into a large, crowded area and they would look for aristocrats or leaders or wealthy people who didn't feel as adamant about the Jewish law as they did, or didn't interpret Judaism the way they did, or they were affront to Judaism. And they'd go into it would be so crowded, and they'd have their cloak on, and they'd have their dagger under their cloak. And remember, you're a time where you're bumping into everybody. And as they bumped in, they'd take that dagger and stick it and leave it and go, "Oh no, look, somebody stabbed this guy." And they were the one that did it. And they were terrorists who used their daggers to kill people if you didn't agree with the law the way they thought about it. So there's a little pressure on the law. Number two, within this whole notion, there's this desire for Jewish self-identity. And Jewish self-identity brings with it a renewal of ancestral customs and a newfound fervor of the law of Moses. Let's get back to our Jewish roots, all right? Which means if you are a Jew in Jerusalem, there's a high pressure for loyalty to the law. You know, we think, well, we've been on these things. We've got Paul's teachings here, and he's letting you know you don't have to keep law anymore. And it's a great thing we're bringing in Gentiles. They are looking at it right now. They're looking at it just as much from a cultural standpoint of we got to get back to our roots. And right at the heart of those roots is the Old Testament law itself, which we've got to maintain to distinguish ourselves as a nation. That's what's going to unite us together, is the Jewish law. So if you're a Jew in Jerusalem, it is almost not even optional for you at this point in time to be anti-law. Keep all this in mind. It will set the tone for what's going to happen today. And it will happen to Paul. Okay, with all this being said, let's go ahead and start reading in verse 17 through 18. Jacinda, will you read verse 17 through 18?
When we had come to Jerusalem, the brothers received us gladly. On the following day, Paul went in with us to James, and all the elders were present.
All right, so it starts out warm welcome. And that's, some people say that's just Luke's irony. We don't know who these believers are, but it don't matter because everybody starts out cool. It just doesn't end that way. And then by verse 18, it's the hint of tension coming up right here, where Paul and his entourage meet with James and the Jewish elders. Okay? And although we are not, well, I'll say this, all the apostles are gone right now. So James, the brother of Jesus, is leading the Jerusalem church. The Jerusalem church is like the Mecca home base of Christianity still. And so, I'll be honest with you, if I was going to be the Catholics to pick a first pope, I might just pick James at this point because he was that high up in hierarchy. He's got that much power. Some people would call him the president of the Christian Sanhedrin. I don't know if I'll go that far or not, but I will say he's got a lot of power right now. Okay? A lot of power. Although not mentioned, what was the reason? Remember I mentioned this last week. Let's see if you can remember. What was the reason why Paul and his boys were even coming to Jerusalem in the first place? What are they bringing with them? Money, relief fund. And although not mentioned, most believe this is where they give them the relief funds. And we don't know what happens with this. There have been writers that try to say that James and the elders reject it, but that would have been an affront. That would have been a total affront to Paul. There are others that say they accepted it upon stipulation. There are others that say they accepted it upon mixed reviews. And then there's Schnabel, who says we don't know how they accepted it, simply because what happens next overshadows the insignificant relief fund when Paul's missionary journey comes to an end, basically, or at least for this time being, and the riots break out, and the arrest breaks out, and all the controversy breaks out, just overshadows this little relief fund. If you want to know more, it possibly is mentioned in Acts 24:17. I kind of believe that it is. Romans 15 mentions it, Galatians 2, 1 Corinthians 16, 2 Corinthians 8 and 9 all mention it. But even if this is where it's given, it is quickly overshadowed by all the controversy surrounding Paul. Go ahead and read verse 19 through 20.
After greeting them, he related one by one the things that God had done among the Gentiles through his ministry. And when they heard it, they glorified God. And they said to him, "You see, brother, how many thousands there are among the Jews of those who have believed. They are all zealous for the law." Well,
what did I just say earlier? What's going on in Jerusalem right now? What is the mindset towards the Mosaic law of Jerusalem? We are adamant about it. It is who we are. And it's just as much Jewish national pride as it is religion, put it that way. It really is. It's getting back to the roots for who we are, our heritage. But it starts out, Paul, one by one, tells them all that God has done among the Gentiles. This means Paul gives a detailed report. And when Paul gives a detailed report, I mean, he gives details. And details, and details, and details, and specific details. And I had a list of things, but I don't even feel like going over that. Just know it's very detailed, okay? Just very, very detailed. And he's going to talk to the council about his mission work that he's done the past 4 to 5 years. It's going to talk about the growth in Asia, the conditions of the churches in Macedonia and Achaia, with the emphasis on what God has accomplished. Okay? That's the emphasis here. God has done this. I put forth all my effort. God has done it. He made it happen. If God didn't do it, it wouldn't happen. And so then upon hearing this, it's not that James and the elders don't go, yay, good for you, because they do. They glorify God, which means what they're doing with this entails recognizing and acknowledging God's presence in Paul's ministry. So James and the elders are okay with the Gentile mission. And I would even say they support it. They're cool with saying that, okay? But instead of really getting in on that and going, that's great, let's talk about it more, they quickly give a missionary report of their own. And in their missionary report, they talk about the successful evangelic efforts on who? While Paul's been over here working with Gentiles, who have they been working with? The Jews. And the Jews are coming to Christ. And this is a Greek term that means tens of thousands of Jews. This means the Jewish Christians in Jerusalem outnumber the Pharisees right now. That's huge, okay? But this is huge, and we've got a successful effort where tens of thousands of Jews in Jerusalem in this situation have come to faith in Jesus as the Messiah. Remember, Messianic expectations were high. So this would have helped open the door for that. But remember, what else was also high? Jewish roots and maintain the Jewish law. So then we see this on the secondary fold. They have faith in Jesus, but they are zealous for the law. Now, this is the same term used in 1 Maccabees for those who fought Antiochus with the Hellenization. So there's almost like a nationalism type idea into this. What this means is you have a passionate commitment to the Mosaic law, diligently upholding all the requirements for daily living and purification rites. Okay? How these Jewish believers got this way is not 100% explained. Certainly the culture, and that's part of it. But the question becomes, are these just spiritually immature new believers? Or are these believers, are they being influenced by teachers like the Pharisaic Judaizers from earlier that are just taking the culture whirlwind and added coals to the fire, and they're getting seduced by teachers who are whispering in their ear building this up? We don't know. I mean, if they're baby Christians in that culture, you know they'd be that way. But are there other teachers not mentioned that are going around doing this as well? We don't know. But this is a real issue, and it's what's called, in early Christianity, it's what's called the fight for the law, and what role the law is going to play in Christianity, okay? Although right now these guys don't seem as extreme as those guys back from Acts 15, they do expect the Mosaic law to be a normal part of Jewish Christian life. Keep all that in mind. This will be important. This leads to the issue in verse 21. Read that.
And they have been told about you that you teach all the Jews who are among the Gentiles to forsake Moses, telling them not to circumcise their children or walk according to our customs. We're back to Jewish roots right now, and this guy's over here telling the Jews, don't be Jews. He's going to stop being Jews, and that's a big deal right here, okay? This is just huge. We don't know the source of these rumors. I totally think the source is unbelieving dysphoria Jews that came in Jerusalem during festival time who just like Paul and just started. Paul's got a lot of enemies right now. How many synagogues has he split right about now? I mean, think about that. Quite a few. You know, he's number one guy wanted as far as synagogue splitting goes. And all these Jews who are in the synagogue still do the religious pilgrimages to Jerusalem. So that means they're going to go to Jerusalem and they hate Paul, which means they're going to be what? Spreading rumors about Paul. They're going to be embellishing gossip. And this is what they're doing here. Now the elders informed Paul the allegations against him, where he is supposedly encouraging Jewish believers in the diaspora to neglect the Mosaic law. What this is saying is, he's basically accused of teaching the Jews who live in Gentile territory to forsake their Jewish identity and abandon their ancestral heritage. What did we just say is a big thing in Jerusalem right now? Everything is not that. Everyone else is going, you need to ancestral heritage, embrace it. You need to embrace Moses. You need to embrace your Jewish identity. You need to push away from Gentiles. And then they're saying that Paul's teaching other Jews in Gentile territory, stop being a Jew. Stop being a Jew. You've got to forsake your Jewishness.
And what they're saying as a whole, there's going to be a threefold accusation with a principal charge, abandon the Mosaic law. This will be huge, I'll tell you in a minute. 2 specific accusations, abolish circumcision and abolish daily Torah observance. In particular, when it says he teaches the need to forsake Moses, this is language of defection. It is religious apostasy. This is bad. This is really bad. It sounds bad because it is bad. Okay? This is where one endorses defiance against the establishment. Those who have the rightful authority are gone up against, and in this case, it goes up against the established authority of Moses and the Mosaic law. This is a huge problem for a Jew, because in Jewish thought, if you were an apostate to Moses, you were what was known as a seducer of the people. Does anybody know what the penalty was for being a seducer of the people?
Probably dead.
The death penalty. And loss of citizenship in the world to come. So, death in this world, death in the next. It is one of the most serious crimes you could have. And remember, Sunday night I mentioned, although they weren't stoning people for fornicating every bunch, then what's the one thing some mob justice might get done about? Theology. And this is getting right at that theology route. So he's getting accused of something that, although they're not supposed to uphold the death penalty, if there's anything that would make them take mob justice into their own hands, it would be this accusation. And not only this, he's accused of telling them not to circumcise their children, abolish circumcision. Now, this is not only one of the central commandments of the Mosaic law, it's the defining mark of God's covenant with Israel. It's basically the badge of honor of Jewish heritage, and it's the physical sign of covenant membership. It's your badge of honor for being a Jew. And what do we say is going on in Jerusalem right now? Jewish heritage, Jewish heritage, Jewish heritage. And the biggest sign of that Jewish heritage, Paul's saying, don't do it anymore. So it's not a little itsy-bitsy spider problem here. This is huge, okay, and the culture he is in. Next, he's accused of teaching the Jews not to walk according to our customs. That is abolish Torah teachings, abolish Jewish customs of daily conduct and daily living. This is what set you apart from Gentiles. How did you know a Jew was a Jew and he wasn't a Gentile? Because he acted like a Jew. How did he act like a Jew? Daily Torah observance. So what he's saying is stop acting like a Jew. Get your Jewish heritage, get it out here, stop acting like a Jew, and be apostate from the Mosaic law. There couldn't be anything. I mean, unless he came and spit in your mom's face, that's about all that you probably could have done at this point. That would deserve a death penalty in all their lives. This is the worst thing they could have said about it at this point in this particular culture. Stop forsaking your unique Jewish self. Be ashamed to be a Jew, is what they're basically saying at this point, okay? Now, the perception versus the reality. Perception versus the reality. Taken as a whole, are these charges true or false?
That'd be true.
In between. Now, when Paul talked about these things, he was always, you hear him talk about no law, no circumcision. He's talking about it in twofold sense. You can't impose it on the Gentiles, and you can't in any way include it in your salvation or think it makes you acceptable to God. But if you had the proper perspective on circumcision and on the law, and you didn't try to impose it on Gentiles, and you understood in no way did it contribute to your salvation, as a Jew, you were still allowed to do it if that's what you wanted to do.
Didn't Timothy?
Yes, by the way, yes. Remember what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 9? For the Gentile, for the Greek, for the Jew, Jew. And with Timothy, we know he was pro-circumcision for the Jews to keep things in unity with them because he got Timothy circumcised, as you were talking about there. He also mentions something in 1 Corinthians where he basically says, if you're a Jew and you want to keep circumcision, that's fine. Just don't think circumcision saves you, because it's a new circumcision of the heart type thing now, okay? And basically what he's saying is he's not discouraging Jews from being Jews. You know, the big question in Acts 15 was, does a Gentile have to become a Jew to be a Christian? And the question here is, does a Jew have to stop being a Jew to become a Christian? And the answer to that is yes and no. Yes and no. Yes and no. That's the answer. So that's how. Yeah, so there you go. That's how you handle that. That's right. It's going to be in regard to the context. You know, even today, if Willis wants to uphold the Passover, and he wants to go sacrifice a ram, as long as he doesn't understand, as long as he understands that it in no way contributes to his salvation, he can do that if he wanted to. If he wants to uphold the food laws and stop eating bacon, He could. He couldn't impose it on Lawrence, but if he wanted to stop eating bacon and butter makes everything better, then that's what he could do. But he
makes boiled bacon for me.
there you go. But he couldn't impose it on anyone else. And he couldn't say, this makes me more acceptable to God. It could, that's right. There you go. That's right. So anyway, right here, there are times, and plenty of times, when you think of Paul, you think of freedom from the law. This defines Pauline theology, okay? He says things like you're not obliged to keep it, like Christians are not under the law. Romans 6, Galatians 3, Galatians 4. Circumcision is nothing, 1 Corinthians 7, Galatians 6. But his main concern is about imposing these things on Gentiles and connecting these things to soteriology or acceptability to God. And so for him, it's all about proper perspective, understanding it through the work of Christ, and understanding if you looked at it the right way and you were a Jew and you wanted to maintain your Jewishness, as long as you didn't impose it or add it to salvation, you were allowed to. So that's why it's yes and no. But we always hear him talking against it because he's always having to fight people with bad doctrine who are trying to impose it on Gentiles and add it to salvation. And this is why you see him always talking about it. So it's just the context. Every once in a while he'll come up with his pro-Jewishness, but it's because his context is so much fighting inaccurate doctrine that's why he comes across as anti-law when he's not. He is just pro-New Covenant law, which is the law of love. Okay? And see, you, being in the New Covenant, are not under the Old Covenant, which means the Old Covenant was given to Israel. You don't have to sleep in a tent when you're in your menstrual cycle. Or you don't have to worry about mixing cotton and polyester. You know, they couldn't do that, right? They couldn't mix cotton and polyester. I mean, I bet some of you here have shirts with cotton and polyester right now. I think I do, as a matter of fact. You couldn't do that if we were in the Old Covenants. You couldn't boil a goat in its mother's milk. I know y'all are real concerned about that one. But things like that you couldn't. But that was the Old Covenant. We are in the New Covenant because the Old was fulfilled through Christ and pointed to something much better. And that much better covenant itself is Jesus Christ, who gives the law of love, which is why you're going to see certain old things carry over. You know, that's why you can't sleep with somebody else's wife, because the law of love. That's why you can't murder somebody else, the law of love. That's why you can't steal from somebody else, the law of love. Not because it was in the Old Testament, but because it carries over into the law of love, New Covenants. That's what you're under. Because you're still under the law, but the New Covenant law of love. And that's the difference, okay? And that's what Paul was about explaining all this, okay? Regardless of the perception versus the reality, the elders knew they had to do something because they got to overcome the negative perception of Paul's ministry, and they got to show these rumors to be baseless. And here's what they're going to do in verse 22 to 24. Read that for us.
What then is to be done? They will certainly hear that you have come. Do therefore what we tell you. We have 4 men who are under a vow. Take these men and purify yourself along with them and pay their expenses, so they may shave their heads. Thus all will know that there is nothing in what they have been told about you, but that you yourself also live in observance of the law. Okay, so verse 22 is going to start the proposal to counteract the false rumors. Now we got to PR up here. We got to get this, so some public publicity. We got to get Paul back in good with the Jewish believers. And we got to get unity back, because we still, as a Jerusalem church, have to go evangelize to who? Jews. And Paul loved Jews. Remember, he wanted, in Romans 9, Romans 10, he was all about the salvation of the Jews. So he would have been cool with that and do what he had to do for the Jews. But it's funny because they start out with a rhetorical question. What's a rhetorical question?
It's yes, no.
Yes. There you go. It's a question, but not really. So they start out with a request command, and it starts out, what shall we do? Well, they know what should be done. They know good and well what should be done. They got to plan the whole time. They understand the urgency of the situation, and they understand the current culture in the city, because they, as the Jerusalem church, is caught right in the middle of it. It's bad for them. You know, Paul, you're going back on a mission trip somewhere where you leave, buddy. We're stuck here, okay? So we got to get this fixed, all right? So they propose a course of action, a kind of practical maneuver, where they strongly desire Paul to counteract the rumors by undergoing a purification rite in the temple and by paying the sacrificial fees of 4 men who are in a Nazarite vow, who are undergoing purification. How do we know these men are in a Nazarite vow? What one thing gives it away? Very good. Very, very good. That's exactly right. That is the very, very, very good. You got 4 men in the Nazarite vow. What they want the Jews to see that Paul is sensitive to Jewish concerns about Jewish practices among Jewish believers, and it has nothing to do with Gentile converts, and it doesn't compromise true faith alone for salvation. Just remember all this. This has nothing to do with Gentiles. This is all about Jews right now, okay? And Jewish believers. Not about Gentiles. That's what's huge about this. And although Paul's role in the matter is not entirely clear, the scenario kind of plays out like this. You got the 4 men in the Nazarite vow. That's where you ask God for some kind of intervention and you promise something in return. For around 30 days, you refrain from intoxicating drink, cutting your hair, or touching dead things. You don't go to any funerals or any other dead thing, okay? And what he basically has to do is join the 4 men, not in the Nazarite vow itself. He ain't got time for that. Because this is a 30-day vow, and he's only got a few days, so it's not that. But to associate and show support for them, then he's asked to purify himself. This is going to be a 7-day purification ritual based on Numbers 8, 19, and 31, to where when a Jew would travel into Gentile territory, when they would return to the Jewish Holy Land, their terminology of it, when they returned, they would have to admit they had been in a defiled area and need ritual cleansing. Particularly once they got the temple going, you couldn't go into the temple if you'd been off in a Gentile territory unless you had gone under this purification ritual to get the dirty Gentile cooties off of you. Put it that way, okay? Just keep all that in mind. Then they're said to pay the expenses. This is going to be one of two things. This is either going to be to pay the expenses for the end of the Nazarite vow. Does anybody know what sacrifices had to be made? Anybody study Bible, got anything, or want to throw any questions out there or anything? Very expensive. Very, very expensive.
It's expensive, then it had to be like an oxen or something.
You're getting it. A 1-year-old male lamb, a 1-year-old ewe lamb, a ram, a basket of bread, various grain and drink offerings. And if he's asked to do that, that's 4 times that. That's a lot of money. It's very, very possible that's it as well. Another theory is that somehow these guys have defiled themselves during the 30-day ritual, which will require them making a purification sacrifice of 2 doves or 2 pigeons, much cheaper. So we're not sure which one. Schnabel thinks it's the last one. Most think it's the first. And I'll say this, if it's the first one, it's a lot of money he's shelling out. That's a lot of money. I don't even know how to go, but it's a lot. What they hope to do is it would show the rumors to be false and show that he's not opposed to the Jewish law itself, that he has not totally forsaken his Jewish roots, and the outreach to the Gentiles is not anti-Jewish. Which, in order to make sure that this in no way is trying to rehash old issues, they then in verse 25, and I'll stop here, bring back up the Acts 15 decision, so everybody will know that we're not trying to impose this on Gentiles. That everybody will know this is just having to do with Jews among Jews in Jewish culture. Read verse 25.
But as for the Gentiles who have believed, we have sent a letter with our judgment, that they should abstain from what has been sacrificed to idols, and from blood, and from what has been strangled, and from sexual immorality.
All right, basically, all I want you to know what that is. It's saying this is not a Gentile issue. The Gentiles just have to stop with idolatry. That's their job. That's their job. We're not going back on that. But what we're saying here is the Gentiles don't have to be Jews to be Christians, but the Jews don't have to become Gentiles to be Christians either. They don't have to forsake their customs. Now verse 26.
Then Paul took the men, and the next day he purified himself along with them, and went into the temple, giving notice when the days of purification would be fulfilled, and the offering presented for each one of them.
Okay. Basically, the next day he goes to the temple. He finishes up the vow, the purification that symbolizes purification itself. By doing this, he shows commitment to unity of the Christian body, forsaking his own freedom, forsaking his own rights for the good of others, the 1 Corinthians 9 concept. And what he's doing is he's willing to bow to cultural sensitivity if it doesn't compromise salvation alone. And there's going to be times you're going to have to do that in your Christian walk as well. Like I said, even now, although my brother's tattoo is of a Bible verse, when he goes on mission trips to other places, he has to wear an armband to cover that up. When I was early in the ministry, remember I played college football. In college football, every guy on the team had an earring. But I went to the Old South teaching in a small church. I quickly took my earring out. It didn't matter if I had the right or not. When I got older and started teaching, instead of doing the battle with the tuck your shirt tail in, what did I transition to? Sweater vests! So that those are things you have to do. And there's going to be things along the lines, if I were ever to take Jacinta to the Middle East, Although she doesn't have to be a Christian to cover her head, I would make sure she covered her head for two reasons. One, for cultural sensitivity. Two, to make sure they didn't kill her. So, those are things you got to do. You have to, if it doesn't compromise your faith, be sensitive to the culture you're in for the greater good of the advancement of the gospel. And that's what Paul is doing right here. He's forsaking his rights in order that Jesus Christ might be proclaimed and unity might be upheld. There are more important battles to fight, and we got to make sure we're fighting the important battles and not the things that are irrelevant. And if you're a mature Christian, that means you're the one that gets to give it up. And that's the end of the story. All right, any questions? Any questions? Did you get, as long as you got that, this is not about Gentiles, it's not about salvation, it's about the Jewish right to maintain it as long as they have the proper perspective. Everybody understand that, right? And remember, Paul is a Jew, so he's allowed to do this. If we were there, we wouldn't be forced to do this. All right, no questions?
Yeah.
Yes?
Up until this time, a Gentile couldn't enter the temple.
He cannot, right, he can enter the outer courts. And he still can't enter, and we'll get on this more when we cover it next time. Solomon's temple was much more welcoming to Gentiles. Once we get into Herod's temple, there's going to be like the inner sanctuary, there's going to be the court of Israel men, there's going to be the court of Israel women, and then there's going to be the outer court of the Gentiles. There are these signs that say, if a Gentile crosses this line, he'll die. We've discovered these signs. Basically, enter your own risk and we will kill you. And that's what's going to happen, is Paul's going to be accused of taking Trophimus across that line. And we will get more into that, but know the Gentiles can only go to the outer courts. If they went any step further, the Jews are going to kill them. And the Romans would actually allow that, by the way. That's one of the few things the Romans would allow them to do. They were very respectful of temples. So that's about it. So that's where they were allowed to go. And although even Solomon never desired that. So, very good question. Anything else? Nothing else? Okay.